We are very, very honored in the next 20 minutes or so to be joined by Larry C. Johnson of NoQuarterUSA.net. We'll go over his award-winning, distinguished career at the CIA. It would take too long, so I won't do it. And he also headed up as deputy director in the U.S. State Department's Office of Counterterrorism, Crisis Management, and so much more. He also ran intelligence operations into Kuwait and that whole situation. Mr. Rosen wrote not one but two articles, January 19th and 20th, saying they intercepted, these are words, they wiretapped the Trump communications, but they did it by people they were contacting. So now they're saying the president has all this egg on his face. It's crazy. I'm going to play, because it's so censored, just a 1-minute clip from the larger 10-minute interview of Larry C. Johnson on RT that they do not want you to see. Here it is.
John Brennan at CIA were intimately involved in trying to derail the candidacy of Donald Trump. That there was some collusion overseas with Britain's own GHCQ. That information that was gathered from GHCQ was actually passed to John Brennan, and it was disseminated within the U.S. government. This dissemination was illegal. Donald Trump is in essence correct that the intelligence agencies and some in the law enforcement community on the side of the FBI were in fact illegally trying to access, monitor his communications with his aides and with other people. All of this with an end to trying to destroy and discredit his presidency. I don't think there will be any doubt of that. I think it's worth noting that the head of the National Security Agency, and Admiral Rogers, made a journey to Trump Tower shortly after Trump had won. And in the immediate aftermath of his visit, Jim Clapper and others in the intelligence community called for him to be fired. Now, why did Rogers go to Trump Tower? My understanding is, let's call it was to cover himself, because he was aware that the NSA the authorities had been misused and abused with respect to Donald Trump. So I think Trump's decision to go out this morning and tweet this was fully intended to send a notice and send word that I don't think he's doing this without evidence. He does have evidence. I think it was just inartfully expressed in the tweet.
All right. Thank you for coming on, Mr. Johnson.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Good, good. So you've heard my breakdown of this. I mean, how accurate is that from your educated standpoint?
Well, yeah, it's the essence of the story. We've got a lot of things going on here. I guess the real fundamental thing that ought to alarm all Americans, regardless of their political party, their political affiliation, is what has been going on with former leaders of the Central Intelligence Agency and in the Director of National Intelligence Agency's office is direct interference in their domestic politics. If we're going to talk about Russian meddling in U.S. politics, it needs to be acknowledged that these intelligence agencies or the principals at the top were involved with meddling. Now, do I have firsthand knowledge that John Brennan was doing this? No, I do not. I have been told, though, by someone who is in a position to know, who's still within the intelligence community, that absolutely that's what was going on. That Brennan and that there were shenanigans going on between the GHCQ and U.S. intelligence. How does that work? You got your listeners should understand that it is illegal without some warrant for any of the intelligence or law enforcement agencies to collect on American citizens. It is not illegal for the British, through their version of NSA, to collect on American citizens, because we're foreigners as far as they're concerned, and we're a legitimate target. Similarly, the United States can freely collect on any British citizen because they're not Americans. They don't have the constitutional protection.
We all spy on each other then.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, if anybody's so naive as to think that the Brits aren't spying on Americans and Americans aren't spying on Brits, well, you know, I hate to burst your bubble, but the reality is that's what spy agencies do. They collect and gather intelligence on other entities. That's one of their purposes. Right. Well, and that was, you know, John Brennan, again, had his fingerprints all over that because they didn't want the information about the torture report to come out. And Brennan initially denied that was going on, and then later had to admit that it had in fact happened. So it's not, we're not raising these allegations without precedent. And my concern here is that involving intelligence agencies in domestic politics takes us down a very, very dangerous road.
I mean, isn't it a big lie to claim we don't have supposedly foreign projected intelligence agencies operating domestically?
Well, they're not supposed to, and there are rules that have been set up. But again, this goes back to the question of leadership. At both the head of the Director of National Intelligence under the Obama administration, Jim Clapper, you had someone who went and lied under oath before Congress. When you lie under oath before Congress, there should be some sanction. There was no sanction. He was not punished. He finished out his tenure with getting awards at the end and a pat on the back, and he's probably out with some nice fat consulting agreement right now. Similarly, John Brennan got caught lying about what they were doing, spying on the Senate. Again, was there any sanction? So when the people who are in the trenches look at their leaders and see the leaders getting by with lying, and then it sends a message that, okay, it's okay for us to do it too. Well, right, and there was the article, I think it appeared, March 1st in the New York Times. Now, this is over about 2 weeks ago, and here's what it says. American allies, including the British and Dutch, had provided information describing meetings in European cities between Russian officials and others close to Russia's President Putin and associates of President-elect Trump. Okay, let me translate that for your listeners. There's only two types of information those countries are going to have. Either they've got human intelligence, they had a spy who was there, who was part of the meeting and could report on it, or they had an intercept, a wiretap, if you will. But, wiretaps, it goes back to the days when all communication went over a phone wire. It's really more correct to call all this electronic surveillance. Well, I'm used to being censored. Look, I got fired as a Fox News analyst. They didn't renew my contract because I went on Hannity and Combs in November of 2002 and said that going in Iraq would be a diversion in the war on terror. And I was told later that Roger Ailes directed that I was not to be allowed back on air because they didn't want that point of view.
By the way, you were the deputy head of counterterrorism, so you'd know.
Well, I was the deputy director, and I had a real long title, so I was not really the number two guy.
The point is, you're an expert on it, and you were really being honest. And by the way, Donald Trump agreed with you back then.
Yeah, that's the fact. What's going on here is the media has invested itself in a particular narrative, and they're not going to give it up, and they won't allow anybody to come on and actually have a debate about it and talk about it in substance. Now, and look, we've yet to come to grips with the reality that when we removed Saddam Hussein, we essentially lit a fuse on a giant bomb that's blown up in our face. And that's where this spread of ISIS and Al-Qaeda that has taken place.
And you warned of that back at the time, because I remember seeing the news articles.
Yeah. So, it's really not that complicated, but we get other things going on. And so now that I have the audacity to suggest that Russia may actually be a victim in some of these activities, and that we on the United States side are doing things that, when viewed from a Russian perspective, would alarm them. I mean, let me just give you a very simple example. 2 weeks ago, and then earlier this week, you get reports in the U.S. news media about a Russian spy ship off our East Coast. And the news media reports it breathlessly as a look at what those dastardly Russians are doing. Yet nobody in the media is reporting that the U.S. military is conducting military exercises. 2 weeks ago, we were conducting a naval exercise in the Black Sea that was simulating a war with Russia. Now, if Russia was conducting military exercises off our shores, simulating an attack on us,
off the coast of, say, Houston,
or had troops in Mexico and Canada. Right now, we have troops in Poland. 2 weeks ago, we had troops in Romania that were carrying out military exercises. So my only point, I'm not to excuse the Russians, but I'm simply saying, let's recognize there's a context for this. They're not reacting in a vacuum. And by the simple fact that I bring that up, I've been accused as being a propagandist, a puppet of Putin, a Russian stooge, and and Senator Paul made an excellent. I mean, he made a substantive argument later. I think the following day on Morning Joe on MSNBC, where he laid out the fact Montenegro is such a poor country. They're so weak militarily, they add nothing to NATO, and they're not going to be able to pay their full weight. So why in the world would we want to bring them into NATO? Because there's nothing to be gained from a strategic.
Unless you want to use it as a trigger for another crisis.
No, and that's exactly right. This is, what most Americans fail to understand. We take great pride in our the greatest generation who fought World War II and everything that they endured and our great sacrifices. We lost the total number of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that died in World War II in both the Pacific and European theater. There were 470,000. The Russians at the Battle of Stalingrad, one battle over a 6-month period, lost 1 million soldiers. My point in this is they're a lot more sensitive to threats on their border than we are. And they view the military activities such as the ones we're conducting as provocative. And the last time they had that kind of military activity on their borders was in May of 1941.
It was Operation Barbarossa.
By the Nazis.
It was Operation Barbarossa was about to kick off.
Yeah, so it's not to apologize for Putin. Putin's a bad guy and does some bad things, but hello, he's not the only one in the world. China is a much more organized threat to the United States, particularly on the economic side. I mean, I could take you through case after case.
The worst gaslighting I've ever seen. Let's play this clip.
Yes, Herb, what do you make of the White House citing your article as part of the evidence?
I mean, it's getting bizarre at this point because we've said it very clearly, and I said on your show, that that's not what the story said. Anybody can read the story and see that's not what it said. And so there's this bizarre circular thing happening where the president cites a theory that he was wiretapped, which developed on the kind of fringe right-wing media.
There it is. There it is, fringe wire. And he wrote an article the day before.
After his tweet storm, Infowars then started saying, well, look, it was the New York Times that reported it, citing our story, misreading our story. And now, a few weeks later, the White House and the president are citing Infowars. So they've got one kind of bizarre right-wing fringe theory to defend another bizarre right-wing fringe theory, both of which there's no evidence to support.
And just to be clear, there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's absolutely nothing whatsoever in your reporting in the New York Times that indicates President Obama wiretapped or ordered wiretapping of then candidate Trump, correct?
Nothing. I mean, if we knew that, that is a fantastic story.
That's a fantastic story. It was all over CNN everywhere. We have the intercepts. We've caught General Flynn. He better resign. We have the transcript. Then they wouldn't release it because there was nothing there. He was lining up a phone call. We're showing you the articles of your radio listener. Intercept Russian communications. Part of inquiry into Trump. Matthew Rosenberg and phone calls from Trump Tower being intercepted. Man, that guy. What would you call Mr. Rosenberg politically? I mean, what is he doing there?
A disinformation specialist. Look, he faults Donald Trump for being able to read. I mean, your listeners and those who are watching, the headline simply states wiretapped data used in inquiry of Trump aides. It wasn't, Donald Trump didn't write that headline. Alex Jones didn't write that headline. That was written by this guy, and then the guy who writes it has the audacity to claim, this is somebody else's fault. I mean, we are living in such a surreal, dangerous time. It's literally the world that we read about as children in Alice in Wonderland. That was a fictional world. We're now seeing it in real time, where objective facts are suddenly dismissed as being right-wing conspiracy theories, and it's just. To me, it's alarming because it really threatens the foundation of our republic.
It does. Can you elaborate on that again? NoQuarterUSA.net, Larry C. Johnson, on why you're saying we're in such a dangerous place for our republic.
This is supposed to be a nation of laws, and look, we can't just blame it on Obama because it goes back. It goes back really. To the foundations, let's say with Bill Clinton is really where we started seeing the worm turn. But it continued on through George W. Bush. And when you essentially lie a country into a war in Iraq, and you raise that, and all of a sudden you're either a leftist nut or whatever.
You lose your moral high ground, and then the sky's the limit.
Yeah. Well, there's no right now. We have I fully support destroying ISIS. However, what's not being debated in this country is the fact that under Obama and now under President Trump, we've put U.S. troops in a foreign country without a declaration of war.
So please continue with just the waterfront of what's going on with ISIS, what you see happening, where you see globalism right now.
Well, what's happened over the last 5 weeks is that President Trump has lifted what were called restricted airspaces. I think the military acronym for it is RAS. Previously, Obama had imposed restrictions in certain areas that no action could be taken unless he gave approval for a strike. So if we had a drone operating there and it observed a convoy, a military convoy of ISIS fighters, or oil convoy taking oil from an ISIS-controlled oil field, and it was in a restricted area, permission to strike that target had to go up the chain of command, which means ultimately it made its way to the White House, and literally Barack Obama had to say yes or no. Well, practically what happens is that means you'll never hit one of those targets, but because by the time you jump through all those hoops, the convoy has long gone. Donald Trump lifted that. The attacks on those convoys have been underway over the last 5 weeks, and there have been significant successes, which are not being reported in the media. The other thing that's going on that's really fascinating is that there is regular communication between the Russian military and the U.S. Central Command in exchanging information over airspace and troop movements. Why? So that we don't have Russian forces firing at U.S. forces. Right. Look, the U.S. intelligence community has known for, at least 4 years, that the fighters that were actually fighting in Syria were not these, non-sectarian, secular Jeffersonian Democrat types. The ones who were actually out there fighting and killing and causing mayhem were the radical Islamists, like al-Nusra, like al-Qaeda, like ISIS. So that's been known in the intelligence community for at least 4 years, and maybe even a little longer than that. So, what was criminal in this is that the United States government continued through the CIA to supply weapons that were winding up in the hands of some of these radical Islamists. Now, why were we doing that? Well, the desire to get rid of Bashar al-Assad came because Saudi Arabia is terrified of Iran's rise to power in the Middle East. I guess one of the saddest things, Alex, over the last really 16 years since the attacks of 9/11 is that the American public, by and large, have not become better informed about really the nature of the threat that arises from within Islam. Most do not understand the split between the Sunnis and the Shias. I still hear today widely commented, it's said over and over by both Republicans and Democrats that Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror. Well, that's simply not true. That was true 20 years ago. But when you look at all the terrorist attacks that have taken place in the last 15 years, most of them, 96% of them are linked to radical Sunnis. They're opposed to Iran. So is Iran a bad actor? Yeah, Iran's got its problems. I'm not arguing that there's some innocent here. But it doesn't do us any good in our public discussion to misinform and actually deceive the American public about the true nature of the threat. Because candidly, we'll find it much more easy to negotiate with Iran, where women can drive cars and women can serve in the legislature, than it will with the Saudis, who still live in a 13th century society. But we can't have that discussion because the Saudis have more oil than the Iranians, at least right now, that affects American interests. But it's just, I use that as an example.
And now we have Rex Tillerson saying, okay, you're threatening us, you're pointing a gun at us, first strike is now on the table.
Well, and we raised this earlier. Let me give you an example of one simple thing that the Chinese government has been actively involved with. In the United States, at luxury automobile dealerships, there's something called a straw buyer's program or a straw leasers program. So what happens is you get the stay-at-home moms, retired people, students. They'll find something in Craigslist inviting them to come out. They get paid $200 to $1,000, go out and buy an automobile and or lease an automobile, and they do it in their name. But what happens is they're given a check, a cashier's check, and that cashier's check then goes to the dealer, and the car comes out of the dealership. They drive it down the road. They turn the keys over, and next thing you know, those cars are being sold in China. So you're talking all the prominent luxury brands like Mercedes and Lexus and BMW. So you've got all of these going to China. Well, that's being done with the full knowledge of the Chinese government. And in fact,
you're saying they're actually stealing the cars.
Yeah, well, they're illegally exporting them to China, and then but they're doing it with the full knowledge of the Chinese government. And once they're in China, then they're being sold below the price that the other, the regular. Well, yeah. So the Chinese are they're genuinely an organized criminal enterprise. They're doing it across the board. I mean, I know of commodities that they are smuggling into the United States through other countries. So yeah, but with recognizing that China is a threat, again, I think one way to deal with that would be for us to work with Russia and trying to isolate China. Look, there's nothing to be gained. Well, I think one reason driving it is Russia's anti-homosexual policy. I think that has actually played a major influence.
Absolutely. I know Hollywood hates anything Christian.
Yeah. So it is, I don't think a war with Russia or with China is in anyone's interest. Those kinds of things have got to be avoided. We should not kid ourselves that you can have a limited war. I wonder if the Chinese are ultimately behind this, because if they can get the West to stop reproducing, the Chinese will just outpace us in that regard, and they don't have to fire a shot. Now, look, I think, Alex, ultimately there's a way that reasonable people can talk. There's going to be differences, but what really alarms me is that if you take a different point of view, if you dare to suggest that there might be a way to talk to Russia, all of a sudden, you're called a right-wing nut instead of listening to the substance of your argument.
No, worse than that, you're called a Russian agent. I mean, he said that was so crazy that Senator Paul works for Putin.
Right. Well, I remember Adam Schiff, the Democrat leader on the House Intelligence Committee, called Tucker Carlson that accused him of carrying water for the Kremlin. Well, ultimately, it's the American people that are out there in the heartland. They understand when they're being lied to. They understand when they're not being told the truth. And I think if we just come together over this and begin putting pressure on these institutions, that they can eventually come around. But ultimately, our representatives, senators, have to hold these people accountable.
So what's most positive versus most negative? What do you see coming in the future on the positive outcome versus negative outcome with open talk of World War III?
Well, the positive side is that the internet is still not under government control, that there are still information outlets out there, that people do not have to rely upon the big three networks or the cable news channels in order to get their information. They can go outside of that. They can go to the source. They can do research. I mean, I wish I would have had when I was at CIA the kind of investigative power I have now, just standing at my computer at my home. And so there's great power in that information, and to network not just domestically but internationally, because we're not just talking about here in the United States. There are other people around the world who don't want to see a war like this either unfold. But Alex, what we're seeing as well is on another positive thing is I'm seeing this. It does cross some ideological divides. I myself tend to be, a libertarian conservative, but I'm sharing views and the issues with people like Professor Stephen Cohen of Columbia University, who's always been, accused by some on the right as being a dupe of the communists. With Daniel Ellsberg, the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, a variety of analysts. Some include whistleblowers from the NSA like Bill Benny and Thomas Drake and Kirk Beebe and Ed Loomis. And so we cover really quite a spectrum on the right. So it's a recognition that this is not a traditional right-left issue.
Right or wrong.
this goes back to the more fundamental issue that, look, we're a republic. The government should have some limits on what it can do to an individual. The government should have no power to invade your privacy and come into your home without a warrant or without having a good reason. And right now, as it's been uncovered in the last several weeks with the latest WikiLeaks revelations, we're seeing that, in fact, the CIA does have that power, and that power has probably been used.
Larry C. Johnson, NoQuarterUSA.net. Please come back soon. A lot of really informative information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.